He said I'd crumble. His best friend even bet on it. That when I got served divorce papers, right in the middle of Christmas dinner, I'd cry. I didn't. I signed them calmly. Then handed them a gift box. Wrapped in gold, ribbon tied. Inside was something they never expected. And something they'd never recover from. But if you want to understand why that moment mattered, you have to know who I used to be. My name is Rebecca Hayes. I'm 34, and I live in Savannah, Georgia. I work as an office manager, budgets, scheduling, spreadsheets, logistics. Nothing glamorous, but I'm good at keeping things in order. And for a long time, I thought if I kept everything running smoothly, my marriage would stay standing too. I married Mason Carter when I was 25. He was charming. Confident. The kind of man who could sell cheap wine like Vintage Reserve. And in those early months, when he held my hand at parties and kissed my forehead in elevators, I thought I was safe. I didn't realize how easily a smile can become a leash. 5 days before Christmas, I was walking through the hallway with a tray of drinks, when I heard them laughing in the living room. "She'll fall apart," said Derek Vaughan. "You know women, they always do." And Mason, my husband, just chuckled. Like my pain was predictable. Like I was already halfway gone. They didn't know I was listening. Didn't know what I'd already set in motion. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to act calm while your world was being rearranged. Drop a comment, a name, a story, or just a me too. Now, let's go back to where the laughing started. And the woman I used to be started disappearing. The first time Mason made that joke, we were at a dinner party. He had just refilled my wine glass, smiled at the table, and said casually, "You know, I could leave Rebecca tomorrow and she'd probably thank me for the favor." Laughter. From his friends. From the women I used to call mine. And from me. I laughed. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was easier than asking what he meant. Easier than being the woman who can't take a joke. That night, I washed dishes while he scrolled on his phone. He didn't say anything. Didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't notice I was quiet. I told myself it was just a one-time thing. But it wasn't. It became a pattern. Mason liked to be the center of attention. And I was the supporting character in his act. He had a line for every occasion. If Rebecca didn't nag me so much, I might remember our anniversary. I love her, but God help me if she ever tries to cook risotto again. Don't mind her, she just likes things her way. Always with a wink. Always followed by laughter. Always just sharp enough to leave a scratch. To our friends, it looked like banter. Cute couple stuff. Married people teasing each other. But inside, I started shrinking. I stopped wearing my red dress after he said, "Trying too hard, aren't we?" I stopped bringing up ideas during group dinners. He once said I talked too much in front of his boss. I started waiting for his reaction before I spoke. Editing myself. Every sentence. Every smile. The more I shrank, the more room he took. He liked to hold court. Loved being seen as the clever one, the charming husband. And to make that work, I had to be the fool. I remember one afternoon, we were grocery shopping. He picked up a bottle of cheap red wine and said, loud enough for the woman next to us to hear, "This is all Rebecca drinks, anything above $10 makes her feel like royalty." The woman chuckled. I smiled. But something inside me cracked. Not all at once. Not loudly. But like a hairline fracture in glass, quiet, invisible, until the pressure builds. That night, I stood in the shower until the water ran cold. My forehead against the tile. Mouth shut tight. I didn't cry. I just stopped talking. People ask me now. Did he ever hit you? No. He never raised a hand. But you don't need bruises to be broken. You don't need shouting to feel unsafe. Sometimes, all it takes is a joke that lands too well. He knew what he was doing. He chose his words like weapons, carefully concealed in charm. Never loud enough to look bad. Always soft enough to make me doubt myself. It wasn't abuse, not technically. It was erosion. And the worst part? I defended him. When my sister came to visit and raised an eyebrow at one of his comments, I waved it off. He's just sarcastic. He doesn't mean it. But later, in the kitchen, she looked at me and said, "You flinched before you laughed." That's when I realized. I had trained myself to react before he could react worse. I had memorized how to keep peace. I had confused compliance with stability. For a long time, I thought marriage meant compromise. That maybe all couples had to dull themselves down to survive. But survival isn't the same as living. I kept working. Managing schedules. Balancing budgets. Making the home look full while feeling empty. Mason was thriving, on the outside. He got promoted. Started dressing better. Came home later. He joked that I was his anchor. But what he meant was, I stayed in place so he could drift freely. The last straw wasn't a scream or a fight. It was a brunch. His coworkers were there. He raised his glass and said, "Let's toast to our wives, especially mine, who still thinks I'm funny." Everyone laughed. Even me. But in that moment, I wasn't Rebecca anymore. I was a role. A well-rehearsed smile. A woman who had become the setup for his punchline. And that was the day I opened a new folder on my laptop. I named it "For Later." Inside, I saved a single file. A blank document. Waiting. The first entry I typed into that folder was dated 2 days after that brunch. It said, "Don't forget the way his eyes lit up when they laughed at your expense." That was all. No rage. No plan. Just a note. A breadcrumb for the woman I might need to become. At the time, I didn't know what I was building. I just knew I couldn't stay asleep anymore. Mason's jokes didn't stop. They got bolder. Sharper. He was getting applause, and I was the punchline that kept him relevant. Then came the gala. A corporate fundraiser. Champagne, string quartet, floor-length dresses. I had spent 2 hours getting ready. Hair curled, dress steamed, even wore the heels he liked. We were 2 glasses in when I caught him watching another woman walk by. The way his eyes lingered. And then he muttered, under his breath but clear enough for me to hear, "You're just like the rest of them. Always needing. Always clinging." My fingers stiffened around the stem of the glass. My throat dried instantly. But I said nothing. Because by then, silence had become my second skin. We left early. He blamed the wine. I blamed myself for thinking a dress could fix a pattern. When we got home, he kicked off his shoes, poured himself a scotch, and collapsed onto the couch. I stood in the kitchen. Not sad. Not angry. Just watching. Then, I picked up a pen. And I said, lightly, "You always joke about leaving me. Maybe we should make it official. Write something down. Just for laughs." He laughed. That deep, careless kind of laugh that said he didn't take me seriously. "You really think I need a prenup to protect my fantasy football winnings?" I smiled. Tilted my head. Held out the napkin. "Then sign it. Just for fun." He scribbled his name at the bottom. A joke to him. A trophy to me. He passed out before midnight. I tucked the napkin into my bag. And didn't say a word. The next morning, he had no memory of it. Just groaned about a headache, kissed my cheek, and asked if we had eggs. I said we did. Then I called Alyssa. Alyssa Dean had been my best friend since college. She was now a family law attorney in Atlanta. And the only person who had ever told me, "You don't have to prove he's a bad man. You just have to prove you deserve peace." I met her that afternoon in her office. I pulled the napkin from my bag and handed it over. She didn't laugh. She studied it. Ran her fingers over the ink. Then looked up and said, "This could work. But we'll need to make it hold." She drafted a formal version. We kept the spirit of the joke, but framed it legally. We added protection clauses. Clarity around assets. Language about voluntariness. A signature line. A date. That night, I printed it on clean paper. Slid it into a stack of old bills and tax documents. Left it on the kitchen island. He signed it the next day without blinking. Didn't even ask. Just assumed I needed it for my files. And maybe I did. But not in the way he thought. I had it notarized within 48 hours. Scanned it. Saved it in the same folder labeled "for later." Then emailed it to Alyssa, and to a private backup account she helped me create years ago. I didn't tell anyone else. Not even my sister. Because this wasn't a secret I needed sympathy for. It was a seed. And I was letting it grow. Over the next few weeks, I started logging things. Comments. Receipts. Late nights. Withdrawals. Not obsessively. Not emotionally. Just factually. I created a spreadsheet. Added columns for dates, categories, reactions. I started noticing more. The way he came home late with perfume on his collar. The names on his phone that had no last names. The transaction at a hotel on Valentine's Day, when he'd told me he was traveling for work. I didn't confront him. Instead, I scanned it. Stored it. Logged it. That's when I realized. I wasn't just building a case. I was building a map. Out of this. He still laughed. Still teased. Still said things like, "If we ever split, you'd be lost without me." I nodded. And poured him another drink. Because the old me might have cried. But this version? She was learning how to smile, while planting landmines. The summer party at Mason's company was always a big deal. Open bar. Fancy venue. Everyone trying a little too hard to impress the CEO. I wore a soft blue dress with a thin silver necklace. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't bold. It was just me. Comfortable. Collected. We walked in holding hands. He looked polished, as always, fresh shave, new suit. That cologne he wore when he wanted to charm the world. For a while, things felt okay. We mingled. Laughed. Told old stories to strangers. I stood beside him, smiling, nodding. A fixture. An accessory. But not a person anyone asked questions to. Until the new interns showed up. Young. Smart. Dressed like they'd Googled chic but professional the night before. One of them leaned in, asking Mason what his wife did. And before I could answer, he cut in. "She organizes my chaos. Thinks she runs the house. But between us, her real hobby is overspending." They laughed. Even the intern. And I smiled. Because that's what I'd taught myself to do. But something in me snapped. Not loudly. Not visibly. Just inward. I excused myself and walked toward the catering table. The fruit tray was slightly crooked. The strawberries weren't in a full circle. So I fixed it. One slice at a time. My hand stayed steady. My breath stayed calm. But inside, I was filing it away, another entry, another date, another reminder. He had made a sport of minimizing me. And I had made an art of pretending not to notice. That night, as we drove home, he hummed to the radio. Tapped the steering wheel like he hadn't just embarrassed me in front of 30 strangers. "You were quiet tonight," he said. I didn't have much to add, I replied, eyes on the road ahead. He didn't push. He never did when he thought he'd already won. The next morning, I bought a second notebook. Not digital. Not typed. A real one. Hardcover. Black. No name. I hid it beneath the lining of my nightstand drawer. Each night, I added a new line. Just one. July 8th, humiliated me in front of interns. No apology. July 11th, came home at 1:32 a.m. Smelled like vodka and vanilla perfume. July 16th, said I was too sensitive after I didn't laugh at his story. It became a ritual. A quiet one. Something that belonged only to me. Mason didn't notice. He had grown comfortable. Arrogant. When someone thinks you're no longer a threat, they stop hiding their weapons. He left his phone on the counter. Screen lit up with messages like, "Same room tonight? She's clueless. Don't worry. That thing you said at the party, brutal. But true." He thought he had covered every angle. He hadn't. I didn't confront him. I just forwarded screenshots to the backup email Alyssa and I had created. That same night, I made his favorite meal, lasagna, garlic bread, that expensive red he liked. He kissed my cheek. Said, "God, you're good to me." And I smiled. Not because I believed him, but because I needed him to believe I still believed. The next weekend, we hosted a barbecue. Friends, co-workers, Mason on the grill like some suburban king. Beer in hand, apron on. Barking at the ribs like they were employees. I was slicing watermelon when I heard Derek Vaughn behind me, laughing with Mason. "She's loyal, I'll give her that," Derek said. "But you know she'll collapse if you ever pull the trigger." Mason took a swig from his beer. "That's why I haven't yet. It'd be like kicking a puppy." They both laughed. I arranged the slices into a perfect fan on the plate. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Later, Mason came up behind me, arm slipping around my waist, lips brushing my temple. "You look beautiful today," he said. "Thanks, sweetheart," I replied. That night, I began recording his phone calls. Only the ones that mattered. Ones where he slipped. Where he said too much. Where he laughed too loud at things no man in love should find funny. I labeled the files by date. Stored them in a locked folder. Copied them to a flash drive Alyssa would keep. Not for revenge. Not yet. Turkey roasted golden. Every plate gleamed under soft string lights. My table settings were symmetrical. My smile was steady. Everything was exactly the way Mason liked it. Or so he thought. I'd spent the day baking, basting, decorating. Not because I wanted the night to be beautiful, but because I wanted it to be memorable. Derek Vaughn was already half drunk when he arrived. Of course he was. He slapped Mason's back and made some crude joke about mistletoe and interns. Mason laughed. Everyone did. Except me. I moved through the room like a shadow. Filling glasses. Adjusting napkins. No one noticed the steel behind my softness. I caught my sister Elena's eye once across the room. She smiled. A real one. The kind you give someone you know is holding something heavy but walking tall. Dinner began. Small talk. Toasts. Mason at the head of the table. Carving the turkey like he was the patriarch of a Norman Rockwell painting. I sat directly across from him. He looked proud. Confident. Too confident. His hand brushed mine once as he passed the gravy. I didn't pull away. Because I needed him to think I was still under it. still inside his illusion. Best bird yet, his dad said through a mouthful of stuffing. She's had years to practice, Mason chimed in. Then raised his glass toward me. 8 Christmases, right? I nodded. 8. He smirked. Well, here's to 8 more. Or however many we last. A few chuckles echoed. Nothing loud. But just enough to sting. I dabbed my napkin against my lips. Calm. Focused. Then Derek leaned over and whispered something to Mason. I couldn't hear the words. But I didn't need to. Because Mason's expression shifted into the exact one I'd been waiting for. The smugness. The anticipation. He tapped his glass with the back of a butter knife. The room quieted. I'd like to make a little toast, he said, standing. Well, not so much a toast. More like a gift. He reached into his blazer. Pulled out an envelope. White. Thick. No ribbon. Derek's been telling me for months to stop dragging this out, he said casually. Tapping the envelope against his palm. Turns out. I've met someone. And her lease ends in January. A few awkward laughs. Someone cleared their throat. He walked over and placed the envelope beside my plate like it was dessert. Merry Christmas, babe, he said. And congratulations. I stared at it for a moment. Then opened it, slowly. Inside. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Already signed. Already filed. With one section highlighted in yellow. He was proud of that part. I read the line. Read it again. Then I looked up at him. He was smiling. So I smiled back. Thank you, I said softly. His brow twitched. He hadn't expected gratitude. I reached into my purse. Pulled out a sleek silver pen. Signed the papers in one clean stroke. Dated them. Capped the pen. Slid the envelope back to him. Done. Silence. Elena's fork hovered in midair. Derek's smirk faltered. Mason blinked. That's it? He asked. That's it, I replied. Then I reached under the table. Lifted a gold-wrapped box. Placed it between his plate and his pride. What's this? He asked. Your real gift. He hesitated. But tore the paper. Inside, a leather folder. He opened it. His face drained of color. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He flipped pages. Scanned the header. Saw the date. The signature. His own. What is this? Derek whispered, leaning closer. I answered for him. A notarized prenup Mason signed 11 months ago. Filed. Reinforced. And legally binding. But I filed first, Mason began. I cut him off, gently. That's true. Which means this agreement goes into effect under your conditions. Which, as you can see, give me everything. Derek's eyes went wide. Dude. Mason's father cleared his throat. Uncomfortably. Mason still hadn't blinked. I reached back into my purse. One last thing. A small envelope this time. Thin. I handed it to him, quietly. There had been signs. At first, I blamed the stress. The fatigue, the nausea that came in waves, the sudden disgust for garlic. But 3 tests said otherwise. I hadn't told anyone. Not even Elena. Because before I could say it out loud, I had to be sure I could stand on my own. He opened the envelope. Slid out the photo. A sonogram. His head jerked up. Eyes locked on mine. I'm 8 weeks pregnant, I said. Congratulations, Dad. For a second, I saw something flicker in him. Pride? Panic? It vanished before I could name it. You planned this, he whispered. No, I said calmly. I prepared. The room was silent. Not angry. Not chaotic. Just still. Elena reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Across from me, Mason sat frozen. Trapped. Held captive by his own arrogance. And I picked up my fork. Took a bite of apple pie. And smiled. Because it was warm. Because it was real. Because for the first time in years, I tasted freedom. Mason didn't say a word the rest of that night. He just sat there. Eyes fixed on the documents in front of him. His own signature like a confession. He never meant to write. When dinner ended, people cleared their plates in silence. No one rushed to his side. No one asked him how he felt. Not even Derek. Elena stayed behind. She didn't offer sympathy. She didn't ask questions. She just helped me blow out the candles. One by one. Then she said, "You're not waking up alone tomorrow." And she didn't leave. We curled up in the guest room that night. Me on my side. Her hand resting gently over mine. Her thumb tracing tiny, slow circles. The silence in the house was different now. Not tense. Not dangerous. Just unfamiliar. When I finally exhaled, it felt like releasing breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. By morning, Mason was gone. No note. No message. No slammed door. Just absence. His keys were missing. His closet half empty. I made breakfast for one. The toast popped without startling me. The coffee didn't go cold from being ignored while I cleaned up after him. And for the first time in years, I sat down and ate without checking his mood. By 9 a.m., I called a locksmith. "Emergency or standard change?" he asked. "Standard," I said. Then paused. "But make it fast." He came by 2 p.m. Kind eyes. No questions. When I handed him Mason's old keys and said, "Make sure none of these work anymore," he just nodded. That night, I moved into the master bedroom. It still smelled like him. Expensive cologne. Crisp laundry. Something cold and artificial that once felt like safety. I opened all the windows. Let the December wind sweep through. I stripped the bed. Washed everything. Lit 3 sandalwood candles I had hidden in the back of the hallway closet. Candles Mason said gave him headaches. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the flickering light dance across the new sheets. It felt like walking into someone else's house. But one I could finally call mine. The next few days were quiet. Mail came with red stamps. Final notice. Past due. Immediate action required. I didn't open them. I just stacked them neatly on a side table near the front door. They weren't mine. "Jenny," Alyssa called. Her voice practically bubbled. "You won't believe this," she said. "Try me." His lawyer called. "Apparently, your little holiday gift didn't go over well." I laughed softly. "Is it official?" "He lost 70% overnight. And with a baby on the way." She paused for effect. "He'll need a payment plan." I didn't gloat. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because winning wasn't the point. Peace was. For the first time, I could sit in my living room without bracing for the click of his key in the door. Jenny paused. "I'm proud of you," she said. Those 4 words broke something in me. Not in a painful way, but like ice thawing in sunlight. "Thanks," I whispered. "For staying. For seeing me." "You've always been strong, Rebecca," she said. "You just finally believed it." Not long after, Elena moved into the guest room permanently. She brought 2 suitcases, a cactus, and a box of muffins she baked with lavender and honey. "I'm staying," she said. "And not just because you shouldn't be carrying laundry baskets in your second trimester." We found our rhythm. She worked from the kitchen table, wore fuzzy socks in July, sang off-key when making pasta. She didn't ask about Mason. She didn't have to. I was done repeating that story. The house changed slowly. I repainted the master bedroom in sage green. Moved my desk to the sunroom. Bought new towels. Donated every dish set we got at the wedding. And every night, before I slept, I wrote in a new journal. One with a leather cover and thick ivory pages. I called it Plans That Are Only Mine. Some entries were long. Some just a sentence. But each word felt like rebuilding a life brick by brick. One afternoon, I passed Mason on the street. He was coming out of a bank, muttering into his phone. Didn't notice me. Or maybe he did. And didn't know what to say. I kept walking. That night, I made chamomile tea. Put on Nina Simone. And sat barefoot on the kitchen floor, humming softly while folding baby onesies. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. By spring, the nursery was almost done. I painted the walls soft yellow. The kind of gentle light that makes morning feel like a beginning. Strung up fairy lights across the window. Hung a tiny mobile shaped like clouds and paper moons. Elena found a rocking chair at a thrift store. We spent 2 hours trying to assemble it. Laughing until tears fell. "This is your villain origin story," she said, holding a screwdriver upside down. It wasn't. It was my return story. My resurrection. Each day passed with small rituals. Herbal tea in the sunroom. Music humming in the background. Lists of baby names taped to the fridge. We vetoed 20. Circled 5. But one kept coming back. Autumn. Because that's when everything started falling apart. And somehow, also when everything began. I stopped checking Mason's social media. Stopped wondering what he was doing. Where he was working. Who he was charming next. That part of my life became background noise. One morning, I opened the hallway closet. And pulled out the last box I hadn't touched. Our wedding photos. I sat cross-legged in the living room and opened the lid. The smell of cedar. The crackle of ribbon. The first photo, him holding my waist, my eyes wide with love and hope. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I slid the photos into a plain envelope. Labeled it to release. And drove them to a donation center. No speech. No drama. Just closure. On the way home, I stopped at a bookstore. Bought a blank journal with a deep green cover. That night, on the first page, I wrote, "This life is mine. Entirely." Elena read it over my shoulder. "Damn right it is," she whispered. A few weeks later, autumn arrived. 3 weeks early. Small but strong. 10 perfect fingers. Eyes shaped like mine. And cheeks pink from the cold. I held her in my arms, wrapped in a soft white blanket. And whispered the first promise I ever made out loud in years. "You will never learn love through fear." We went home 2 days later. The house smelled like cinnamon and clean linen. The nursery glowed in the afternoon sun. And for the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt steady. The first night she slept on my chest, I didn't blink. I watched every breath. Every flutter of her eyelids. Every tiny sigh. And when she stirred, just once, my hand moved instinctively to comfort her. I had spent so long preparing for war. I forgot what peace felt like. Now, I memorized it. One morning in early June, Jenny stopped by. She brought peach cobbler and a bottle of sparkling cider. "Do you realize what you've done?" she asked, holding Autumn in her lap. "I've survived?" "No. You reclaimed your life, Rebecca. And you did it without screaming, without burning it all down. You didn't just leave the fire. You built a house beyond its reach." I smiled. Not out of pride, but relief. Because I finally believed it. A few months later, I hosted a small dinner. Just Jenny, Elena, a few neighbors. No drama. No speeches. Just lasagna and laughter and the occasional coo from the bassinet. At one point, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. Hair tied back. Socks mismatched. A smudge of sauce on my cheek. I looked tired. But alive. Whole. After everyone left, I tucked Autumn into her crib. Wrapped in a pale blue blanket with stars stitched into the corners. I stood there for a while. Watching her sleep. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a hush. A promise. Not that everything would be easy. But that it would be mine. And that was enough. As I turned off the nursery light, I whispered. He said I'd be nothing without him. I looked down at my daughter. Her chest rising and falling like the most sacred rhythm I'd ever known. Then I smiled. Turns out, I'm everything without him.